Martin, here we are in the glorious sunshine of Suffolk in my garden. Matthew 10, 40 to the end. What do you make of this passage and what's it all about?
Okay, so first of all, it's very short. Secondly, it comes at the end of quite a long section in Matthew's Gospel where Jesus is addressing the disciples. So a whole lot of instructions we've been reading these over the last several weeks. I think the thing that strikes me about this is, first of all, if you think the whole language is about receiving people and responding to them. So you receive people who are travelling. So there's clearly something in Matthew's mind, and that reflects the life of his church, of itinerant preachers, itinerant ministers, itinerant teachers, and so this how do you receive these people who are travelling around? There are three sorts of people who are described. There's the apostles, the righteous, and the little ones. And one way of reading it is the apostles and the righteous are maybe rather special categories of people.
Mm-hmm.
The little ones are all the ordinary people. So actually, in the end, you end up saying that when anyone who comes to you, any member of the faith community who comes to you, you receive them generously, warmly. You give them hospitality, kindness, even a cup of cold water, which is a generous gesture to someone who's been travelling through the heat.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first thing, is just recognizing what the dynamic is that's going on in the passage, and I'm struck that it therefore applies to us, and it therefore applies to us in every possible way, and the way in which we receive one another, fellow Christians, and our hospitality, our reception, our generosity isn't necessarily a characteristic that we see expressed in every encounter between Christians, particularly when there is either unfamiliarity or difference or other sorts of distance between us. So we tend to say, I'm not sure about this. I don't I don't like what you think about that, or I don't like what you do about that, or blah 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 blah. No hint of if you are calling upon the name of Christ, then you are received hospitably. And for me still, and this must have happened 20-30 years ago possibly, extraordinary experience. I was visiting my sister, who for a long time lived in Uganda. She was married in Uganda, and her daughter was born there. And I was visiting her, and she lived in Entebbe. And I was there on a Sunday. I said, Janet, I want to go to church. And my sister's not the most regular churchgoer, so she said she knew where there was one. So I went along, and we sort of checked it out, I think, the day before. Of course, there's no signs, no notice board saying what time the service was. So I turned up at what I thought might be a reasonable time, like 10 o'clock, where they'd clearly been going for a couple of hours. And I arrived, I walked into the porch, and there were these people wearing albs, and they immediately welcomed me. It turned out that the folk wearing albs were sides people, basically, ushers all. And they walked me to the front, singing or sermon or something was going on. And it wasn't the sermon, actually. There must have been some singing going on. Walked me to the front, and I thought, this is because they're, being Anglicans, all the spare seats are at the front. Well, they walked me to the front. We went past the front, up into the sanctuary area, and sat me next to the minister. Now, I was wearing, I don't know, knit collar and slacks or something. Nothing.
Sports casual.
Nothing remotely to suggest that I might have anything to do with the church other than that I'd come to worship. And it was quite extraordinary, because then they wanted me to speak. Then they did discover that I was ordained, so they wanted me to give the blessing. And somebody sat beside me and translated the sermon. And they had there was no way there would be any reason for them to have behaved in that way. And I remember it incredibly powerfully now, that this was an extraordinary experience of being received, one of the little ones being received by this community in the most generous way. I discovered afterwards that there are two Anglican churches in Entebbe, one where the white folk go, and one where the black folk go, and I went to where the black folk go, and it was an for me it was a transformative experience of receiving Christian hospitality, welcoming a stranger. So that's the story that comes to my mind when I.
And massively touching, as you say. I mean, I remember just last year on Sabbatical in Jerusalem and Easter Day at the cathedral. This was before people had started really flooding back from abroad to Jerusalem. And Archbishop Hassam invited everybody there afterwards to lunch, which I thought would be very nice, but it'd be kind of like a buffet arrangement, and you'd grab your sausage roll and your cheese straw and you'd go off into a corner. Oh no, it was one very long table around which everybody sat outside, and delicious food. And during the course of it, Archbishop Hassam went round every person, greeting them and thanking them personally for their presence there, and explaining why he was thankful for their presence there.
Goodness.
So it stays with you, this hospitality.
And he's remarkable. He is absolutely remarkable. Yeah.
So I was in a different place with this passage, because I was dwelling a little bit on, in as much as you give one of these little ones a glass of water, you'll not fail to lose your reward. And I was thinking how often we kind of duck and dive around the issues of rewards and punishments. And we tend to kind of want to sort of forget about rewards and punishments, because it's not a very good motivation that I am rewarded as to why I would give a little one a cup of water. And somehow it makes our relationship with God contractual rather than covenantal. And somehow if I do this, I'll get that kind of thing.
Although Jesus is a bit more interested in rewards than we realise.
This is the stumbling block with that position, that Jesus talks about rewards and punishments quite a lot, as do the prophets before him. And indeed, right bang in the middle of his Sermon on the Mount, his longest teaching in Matthew 6, is really quite a bit about rewards. So we can't get away with it. So, I mean, the good news is that, our faithlessness does not prevent the grace of God being presented to us. But the good news seems to be that our faithfulness makes a difference, and makes a difference in terms of the coming kingdom. So how does this work? Does it mean that there are degrees of glory, where if you've given a few more cups of water than I have, then cometh the kingdom? Somehow there is a hierarchy of reward and punishment? Surely it can't work like that. I mean, what some commentators say, well, there may be degrees of glory, but the wonder and the awe of the kingdom will be such that our happiness will be such that we don't really care if, we're on the back row rather than the front row, because the back row will be so glorious. Now, that's one version of it.
But surely Jesus said, I mean, there's the workers who get hired at the last minute.
Well, that's the other way of looking at it, I think, which is the workers in the vineyard in Matthew 20, where actually they are rewarded equally, despite the fact you've come really early in the morning and sweated all day, versus the one who's come at the last minute and really just worked an hour. And of course, the ones who've worked all day are outraged about the fact that the reward is the same. We're not given any explanation as to why the reward is as it is or the way it is. So even if we are to think there are rewards, then we are not at liberty to structure it according to the way in which we think it works. But actually, the one who loves us beyond our ken will be able to provide that in ways which we find to be both joyful and just in the end. And I quite like the way Therese of Lisieux thinks about it, which of anybody gave many cups of water to many of the little ones in terms of her convent. And she said that when she comes before the throne of grace, she'll come empty-handed, because that will enable her to have the joy of receiving all that the Lord has to give her. Do you see what I mean? Which kind of fits with that idea about chocolate. You ever wondered about chocolate? Well, maybe you don't now, but I mean, if you did, how chocolate that's given to you tastes far better than chocolate that you've bought yourself through your own earnings.
Really?
I've found that to be the case.
I think that's a sort of mental illusion.
Anyway, that's a rather undermining note on which to end my otherwise convincing hermeneutic.
I think the thing that strikes me about it is, for which is your reward, for which action is your reward intact? For giving a cup of water. It's a very small gesture.
Yeah, and let's not lose the thrust of that, which is, what might count to us as being the smallest of things, and in worldly terms might be measured as being, the most irrelevant, can actually be the door to a grace that changes everything.
Yeah.